I am Taryn Hart. I am with OccupyMissoula, and I blog at plutocracyfiles.com.
Hi, Taryn. I wear a lot of hats. I'm an author. My recent book is called Age of Greed. I'm a senior fellow with Roosevelt Institute and the New School. I edit a magazine called Challenge, and I blog on a variety of websites, including today the New York Review of Books website, where I'm a regular contributor.
Very good. Kind of the idea of doing this was, one, you had done teach-ins at Zuccotti Park, more than one, with Professor Stiglitz. And I had the idea that we could perhaps record something that could be sent to the other locations who maybe can't get people to come do live teach-ins. Information you think is important for people who are interested in the economic issues that are associated with this movement?
Well, I think the movement's instincts and its focus are essentially correct. I think they accord with the actual facts of the matter. 1% of Americans earn nearly 20% of the income, and we had the worst recession we have had since the Great Depression. Are those coincidences? I don't think they are coincidences. The extreme inequality of income, by which I mean the extreme amounts of income earned at the top, were earned through taking excessive risk on Wall Street, putting, therefore, the economy at risk when all came tumbling down, and we are paying the price for that. The buildup we had until 2007 was based a great deal on debt, Wall Street risk-taking, and that was stimulated, that was motivated by the fact that a lot of people could make a lot of money at the very top. There's an important message there. The gut instinct of this movement accords with the facts. It is right. And all these groups that say, Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Missoula don't understand how markets work. They allowed Wall Street to function in a monopolistic way with conflicts of interest and inappropriate incentives that don't in any way accord with conventional, straightforward economics.
And so you're referring then more to the risk-taking as causing the crash, or is it an underconsumption thesis?
Well, the underconsumption thesis is an international thesis. Mm-hmm. In other words, nations like China don't consume enough of their own goods or import enough goods. Therefore, they send capital our way, which makes it readily available at low interest rates for our consumers. We, in turn, relatively speaking, consume too much compared to the size of the economy, or we did before 2007, based on debt. But all of this goes together. Wall Street took this money and amplified, built a pyramid out of it, and took on much more risk. It issued securities that were significantly riskier than, by and large, they claim they were, than the ratings agencies claim they were, and then so-called sophisticated investors understood. That led to a huge layer of debt, and once that unwound, it led to a very serious recession, a collapse in demand, nobody willing to make loans, or if they were, nobody willing to take loans because the consumer was underwater, and so were a lot of businesses.
Right. And so just in terms of the risk-taking, does Dodd-Frank do enough to correct those problems?
Well, Dodd-Frank is repeatedly watered down these days. It does some things correctly. The things it does correctly, it may not do enough of, partly because of the watering down. There's several big issues, and it's a very complex bill. One of the big issues is whether there are adequate capital requirements on banks. That is, should they keep enough money there on which, and then lend once they've got enough capital behind those loans or other investments they make. They clearly have not, and I think that's an important issue. And I don't think Dodd-Frank has dealt with that adequately yet. It's kind of thrown it to international bankers in Basel to decide on that. Another issue, and there are a lot, once you say the words Dodd-Frank, you open up a big Pandora's box, so to speak.
Right.
Another issue are the derivatives, all those credit default swaps,
right.
which were so central to the risk-taking that went on, and the so-called risk hedging that went on. People use those derivatives to hedge their risks, therefore they can make certain kinds of risky investments. In fact, those hedges did not work. It was not clear people could meet their obligations. The prices were not transparent. They were obscure. And Dodd-Frank does something about that, but it's provided lots of exemptions. The most important thing I think we have to keep in mind is Dodd-Frank should not be merely trying to prevent the next crisis. It should be reorienting Wall Street in a way that it does what it should have done and sometimes did, and I emphasize sometimes, historically, which is to channel our precious savings into productive investment. Does Dodd-Frank, is it really geared to do that? Not really. It's not cutting risks satisfactorily. It's not changing incentives to make bad speculative investments sufficiently, in my view. People, with my general political view, some people disagree with me, but I think the bigger issues are not being met by Dodd-Frank.
Before I do want to ask you what specific policies you think would be most useful, but before I get into that, I want to discuss what you think the role of academics might be in assisting this movement.
Well, there are all kinds of academics. Some of them I would keep away from, like the guys who just won the Nobel Prize. I think academics can begin to put some substance behind the greed issue. I wrote a book called Age of Greed. I actually do think greed in the sense of extreme self-interest and violation of community interest was one of the core problems. I think academics can begin to show how excessive risk-taking, as we already discussed, led to a situation which created a housing bubble, and then when the housing bubble burst, the financial securities that were based on those housing prices burst. And that almost invariably leads to recession, usually a severe recession, and history suggests a long recession. Academics can help a lot in talking about how to get out of this recession. Now, academics disagree. Economics is not a science where there's broad central agreement on certain, there is some broad central agreement on some things, but not others. So some economists will say we have to spend our way out of this.
Right.
Other economists will say we have to cut government spending. Well, I think cut government spending people are entirely wrong. I think the empirical evidence and the theoretical modeling suggest they are wrong. I do think we have to spend our way out of this, especially because it's a recession that's been brought on by a huge and a stagnation that's continued due to a huge overhang of debt.